At a secret auction, hidden in the heart of the desert, a Middle Eastern billionaire acquires a young woman with enchanting beauty. He seeks neither companionship nor love. His sole desire, an heir. Layla, sold for a staggering sum, is an enigma. Silent, resigned, but not broken. In the golden palace of her new master, she awaits her fate with strange serenity. Yet something about her intrigues the powerful man who has bought her. Her gaze, far from fearful, seems to hide a secret. As the nights pass, the billionaire feels his certainties begin to waver. He learns to know Layla, to listen to her silences. She is not like the others. One night, she reveals the truth. She is already carrying life. But it is not the child he was expecting. What he will discover then will forever change his view of the world, love, and his own destiny. Before diving into this captivating story, let us know in the comments where you are following it from. Happy reading to all. When she found herself on the stage, under the eager gazes of powerful strangers, Layla felt her heart tighten. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on Nail, her son whom she hoped to save from misery. The bidding rose quickly, fueling the greed of the men present. Finally, it was a Middle Eastern billionaire, Khaled Al-Mansour, who acquired her for an astronomical sum. She was taken to a sumptuous palace, a world miles away from her life before. Khaled, a cold and determined man, bluntly announced his intentions. He wanted an heir. No emotions, no attachment, just a tacit agreement between them. But Layla, despite her distress, refused to blindly comply. The days passed, and a strange dynamic began to develop between them. Behind his mask of arrogance, Khaled occasionally showed an unexpected humanity. Intrigued by Layla's strength and dignity, he sought to learn more about her past. One night, she revealed what she had been hiding from the beginning. She was already a mother. This revelation shook Khaled. The man who believed he controlled his destiny now found himself faced with an unexpected dilemma. Layla was not just a woman he had bought. She was a mother willing to do anything for her child. What he would discover next would forever shake his beliefs and force him to question his own heart. When the auction began, Layla forced herself to keep her head high. The numbers soared, each announced some ringing like a hammer blow on her destiny. Then, a powerful voice made the highest offer. Khaled Al-Mansour had sealed her fate. Escorted to a luxurious vehicle, she felt her body tremble with anxiety. The man beside her remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Upon arriving at his vast estate, Layla was greeted by a discreet and efficient staff. Despite the opulence surrounding her, a chilling coldness reigned in these halls. The following days were marked by a heavy silence. Khaled imposed nothing on her. Not yet. He simply watched her, as if trying to uncover her secrets. Layla, on the other hand, awaited the inevitable moment with growing dread. Yet, a strange tension hung between them. One evening as they dined alone, Khaled asked a question that caught her off guard. "How did a woman like you end up here?" There was no judgment or disdain in his voice. Only genuine curiosity. Layla hesitated, then responded honestly. She told him about Nail, her sacrifices, and her daily struggles. Khaled remained silent for a moment. It was that evening that something changed in him. Unknowingly, Layla had cracked the armor of this man who seemed untouchable. Layla felt her stomach knot as the auction began. Each woman was presented, evaluated, and sold to the highest bidder. The weight of this reality made her nauseous, but she no longer had the luxury of turning back. When her turn came, a chill ran down her spine. Whispers rose in the room, some appraising her appearance, others discussing her potential price. She lowered her eyes, trying to ignore the eager gazes focused on her. Then, a deep voice called out an amount that silenced the crowd. The final bid was made. Her fate now belonged to Khaled Al-Mansour. Escorted into a tinted window vehicle, Layla remained silent. She could feel Khaled's presence beside her, his imposing aura almost suffocating her. He hadn't spoken a word since acquiring her, and this cold distance was almost more unsettling than a threat. Arriving at a sprawling palace, she was led into a lavish room, far too large for just one person. She expected him to come and demand what he had bought her for, but he did nothing. Days passed, and Khaled remained an enigma. He often observed her, listened carefully when she spoke, but never touched her. Then, one evening, he broke the silence. "You have a son," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Layla stiffened. How had he known? And more importantly, why did this information seem to disturb him so much? The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft murmur of the bidders analyzing every detail of her silhouette. Layla felt her breath quicken as the master of ceremonies began the bidding, his relentless voice echoing through the room. The first numbers were announced, initially hesitant, then increasingly assertive. Her fate was being decided in mere moments, between hands she did not know. A duel began between two men seated in the front rows. One, a Westerner with graying temples, observed Layla with an almost detached curiosity. The other, a man with a dark gaze and an imposing aura, did not flinch when he made an exorbitant offer, crushing all competition. The assembly held its breath. "Sold to His Excellency Khaled Al-Mansour," the organizer proclaimed, bringing down his hammer. Layla felt her legs buckle. She was guided off the stage with feigned gentleness, as if it could mask the horror of the situation. Behind the scenes, a woman with stern features handed her a fine veil and a luxurious coat. "Put this on," she ordered. Layla obeyed mechanically, her gaze empty. A few moments later, she was escorted to a car with tinted windows. Inside, Khaled Al-Mansour studied her in silence. A long moment passed before he finally spoke. "You're afraid of me." Layla looked away. Fear? No. It was much worse. It was the uncertainty of a future that no longer belonged to her. The hammer fell with a loud crash, sealing Layla's fate in the blink of an eye. Her heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The man who had just purchased her stood slowly, his deep black gaze fixed on her with disturbing intensity. Ryan Al-Mansour hadn't needed to fight for her. One offer, and the silence had taken over. Two guards in dark suits approached to escort her off the stage. Layla felt her legs weaken, but she found the strength to move forward. What was the point in resisting? She had lost her choice long before this evening. In a private room away from the main hall, she faced her buyer. Ryan was seated in a leather armchair, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other holding a glass of whiskey that he didn't seem to want. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "Why were you there?" he asked in a calm voice, devoid of any mockery. Layla didn't answer immediately. Did he really need an explanation? Didn't he know that only distress and despair could push a woman to sell herself like this? "For my son," she finally murmured, her throat tight. A flash passed in Ryan's eyes. A fleeting emotion, almost imperceptible, before his mask of impassivity took over again. "I see," he said simply. But Layla felt that, behind his calm demeanor, something had shifted. Layla took the envelope with trembling hands. She stared at it for a moment, as if simply opening it would destroy the little control she still believed she had. Ryan, on the other hand, remained standing, his hands in his pockets, watching her with unsettling calm. She unfolded the pages and skimmed the first lines. A detailed agreement, coldly written, outlining her role, her obligations, and the astronomical sum that would be paid to her in exchange. A sum that would change Neil's life forever. "You want me to give you a child," she whispered, raising her eyes to him. Ryan slowly nodded, his gaze betraying no emotion. "Yes. An heir. And in return, you'll have everything you need for your son. A home, security, a new life." Layla felt a tremendous weight settle on her chest. Was she ready to do this? "And then?" she asked, her voice nearly broken. "Once the child is here, what will become of me?" A silence hung between them. Then, for the first time, a subtle unease crossed Ryan's features. "We'll see in due time," he answered simply. An answer that should have frightened her. Yet, at that moment, Layla realized that this man might not be as unshakable as he appeared. Layla felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The very idea of abandoning a child, her own child, struck her deeply. Her gaze lingered for a moment on the contract, where each word seemed to seal her fate. "What if I refused?" she murmured, challenging the man before her. Ryan raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "You're here because you have no other options." The brutality of his answer took her breath away. He was right. Debt had her in its grip. Neil deserved a better future. But could she really give birth to a child and then abandon it? "You'll have everything you need. A home, money, and your son will never lack for anything." His tone was calm, almost reassuring, but Layla sensed something else behind his words. A hidden wound. Did this wealthy and powerful man, who demanded an heir without attachment, also bear invisible scars? And what if? She hesitated. "What if I wanted to stay?" A flash of surprise passed fleetingly in Ryan's eyes. "That's not part of the agreement." Layla took a deep breath. She knew that signing this paper would also mark the end of a part of herself. But deep inside, a certainty began to take shape. Nothing would go as planned. Layla sprang to her feet, her eyes burning with tears, her heart pounding in her chest. She clenched her fists, trying to control the wave of indignation and fear rising within her. "I can't do this. I can't abandon my own child." Her voice trembled, but the intensity of her emotion was palpable, each word ringing in the room like a cry of despair. How could Ryan ask such a thing? How could he even think she could sacrifice her own child on the altar of his desire for an heir? Ryan's gaze hardened instantly. He remained motionless, like a frozen statue, his face impassive. His tone, however, did not change in the slightest. "You knew what you were getting into when you came here. There's no turning back." His words were as cold as steel, each syllable falling on Layla like an unbearable burden. He was a man of power, used to dominating, to bending those within his reach. For him, everything was a matter of control, of possession. Layla felt the ground give way beneath her. The gravity of his words hit her, but her soul screamed even louder. This reality he was imposing on her was inhuman, absurd. But could she escape it? It's inhumane, Layla protested, her voice broken with indignation, her whole body tense under the weight of this unbearable reality. She clenched the contract in her trembling hands, as if trying to erase the painful truth. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, but they only fueled her rebellion. You think you can buy a child and cast aside its mother as if she's nothing? Her gaze met Ryan's, and in that suspended moment, she searched for a fragment of humanity in his eyes. But there was none. There was only coldness, indifference, and the certainty of having total control over a situation he had carefully orchestrated. Ryan, relentless, took a step forward, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the room. He knew he dominated the space, and he reveled in it. I paid $1 million for you, Layla. This wasn't a whim. You have no choice now. He spoke with such assurance that Layla felt even smaller, like a puppet suspended by invisible strings. She was trapped, and she knew it. Her heart was pounding. A visceral fear paralyzed her, but more than that, there was a deep sense of disappointment. How had she gotten here? How could she have accepted such a price for her son's future? She stared at the pen placed before her. A simple object, yet an overwhelming symbol of her forced submission. Ryan's unwavering gaze fixed on her, and Layla knew that if she signed, there would be no going back. Sign the contract. Once the child is born, you'll receive the money and be free. These words fell on Layla like a sledgehammer, crushing all resistance. She could almost feel the air freeze around her, saturated with the cold scent of the deal that had just been sealed. But more than anything, it was the promise of freedom at the end of the road that trapped her, like a well-designed trap. The money. She could already see it, a lifeline for herself and Neil. But at what cost? What price was she willing to pay for her son, for his future? The dilemma was eating her alive. Tears welled up, burning, but she didn't dare let them fall. She thought of Neil, his innocent smile, his little hands reaching out to her. All of this for him, to give him a better life. And yet, an abyss opened beneath her feet. With almost mechanical movements, her trembling fingers took the pen, and with poisoned determination, she signed the contract. The page darkened with her name, sealing her fate in a promise that suffocated her. Ryan took the document with cold satisfaction, without a word more. He was already elsewhere, his mind turned toward the next step of his plan. Perfect. Tomorrow, we'll do the necessary medical exams. After that, you'll be taken to my residence. Rest. His voice faded in the air, devoid of empathy, as if everything had already been settled. He left the room, leaving Layla alone, frozen under the weight of her decision. There, in that absolute silence, she faced her irrevocable choice, wondering if one day she could forgive herself for this sacrifice. The next morning, the sound of the limousine's engine pulled her from her thoughts, an unyielding reality looming before her. Outside, a light mist still enveloped the neighborhood, but the imposing black car parked in front of her modest apartment seemed part of another world. Layla took a deep breath before opening the door to enter. Neil's innocent and trusting gaze made her hesitate. She knelt to look him in the eyes, her heart heavy with everything she was about to sacrifice. Mommy has to go to work, far away for a few months, okay? Her voice cracked slightly. But I'll call you often. You'll never be alone. Neil, still smiling, waved at her, unaware of the torment tearing her apart. She held him close one last time before separating from her child, a tearing pain in every fiber of her being. The journey was silent. Inside the limousine, the heavy and motionless atmosphere left no room for words. Layla stared at the landscape passing by the tinted windows, a succession of familiar streets slowly giving way to a desert of stones and sand, before transitioning to luxurious modern buildings. The shift was brutal, almost unreal. The city faded behind her, replaced by a world she no longer understood, one of opulence and power. When they finally reached Ryan's property, Layla was speechless. She could not have imagined that behind those imposing gates and perfectly manicured gardens, the horror of her commitment would be even greater. Imposing gates, both majestic and menacing, opened before Layla. Behind them, impeccably maintained gardens unfolded, brimming with vibrant flowers and shimmering fountains, in stark contrast to the simplicity of her past life. The mansion that rose before her seemed straight out of a fairy tale, with its white stone walls and windows adorned with wrought iron balconies. Everything exuded wealth, perfection, but also inaccessibility. Ryan, still distant, waited on the steps, his cold gaze scrutinizing every movement. There was no smile, no warmth in his gestures. Beside him, Layla felt like a powerless spectator, lost in a world where she no longer belonged. Ryan silently guided her through the mansion, giving her glimpses of the splendor in each room, each detail. The furniture, the artworks, everything was elegant, luxurious. But all Layla saw was the isolation in every corner. This world was foreign to her, just like the man who dictated her life. He briefly explained the house rules, the expectations, but his tone invited neither discussion nor empathy. She was just another object in this universe where money and power seemed to control everything. At the end of the tour, Ryan entrusted her to Amira, a servant who appeared kind, but whose gaze hinted at a life marked by obedience. Amira led her to a luxurious yet cold room, another symbol of her captivity in this place. That night, after a quick shower, Layla escaped the chaos of the house by stepping out onto the balcony. From there, she gazed at the horizon, the stars scattered across a vast and indifferent sky. Her soul felt heavy, like a burden she couldn't share. Her mind wandered to Nail, imagining his face in the dim light of their apartment. The thought of leaving him behind tore at her. But this sacrifice was necessary, wasn't it? Alone, in this oppressive mansion, she wondered if she would ever manage to break the invisible chains of this insane pact. For now, everything seemed so irreversible. Freedom felt out of reach, and the life she had left behind was nothing more than a distant memory.